This is a Pasco Media production. Please visit pascomedia.com.
In Latin, Renovo means to renew, restore, or revive. This is the show where we explore the miraculous nature of the mundane as we look at one part of the Catholic tradition to help you engage more fully in the practice of faith. Past episodes are available at renovopodcast.com. I'm Doug Tuke, and today, let's just go for it, right? This is like a series of shows tackling like the most difficult topics ever. Let's just go for it. We're going to talk about evolution. That's right, baby. Throwing down. Scopes trial. Bring on the monkeys. Let's do this. Here's the thing. I'm a big advocate for the reunification of faith and reason, especially in the Catholic Church. The sentiment that we are anti-science is the dumbest thing I have ever seen. It's so dumb. It's just ridiculous. So let's tackle the topic that kind of threw open the hatches on the conversation about science and religion in the first place, and just go over this notion of evolution. So there's this great misperception in the culture that Catholicism is anti-science, right? And it's ridiculous. Like a lot of college students basically run into this in classes, when they're studying reductionism and rationalism and materialism, and their professors are throwing chalk at them and saying blah, 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 okay? So we dismiss this idea. We dismiss Catholicism outright because we don't realize that the answers to all these questions exist within the church's 2,000-year history. No big deal. It was a Jesuit who developed the Big Bang Theory, who was buddies with Einstein. No big deal. All right, so it's a big cause of confusion, and evolution is probably one of the real, just kind of one of the pieces of kindling that kind of stirs up that fire. And the reason for the confusion is twofold, okay? First, like a lot of Catholics don't realize the church's position on evolution at all, and they don't even look for answers before accepting kind of a materialist position, okay? So second, there's like an abandonment of philosophy as joining this idea of the discipline between science and theology and how they can be in dialogue, okay? We've kind of just said, no, that can't happen, which is so ridiculous because the two actually originated as one discipline, which is weird. So an example is like Thomas Aquinas, okay? Thomas Aquinas' first cause argument, which you've heard about ad nauseum in your collegiate days, I'm sure. This first cause argument grounds the notion of like scientific inquiry into the first cause. Something had to cause something to start at the very, very beginning of all causes, and that is God, Aquinas argues, right? So without this argument, science pretty much just kind of devolves into materialism, which a lot of philosophers have actually tried to help it do over the years. And that kind of doesn't work, that material exists for material's sake. That doesn't really function. So science teaches purpose. So we go back to this Aquinas marriage of faith and reason. Okay, I'm trying not to be super heady, but can you tell that I studied this for a really long period of time and I'm trying to unpack this beauty, okay? So the divorce, this like divorce between philosophy and science and theology basically creates an environment where both theology and natural science kind of start to overstep their boundaries. And this is basically easily found, okay, in like the notion of there is no God. Okay, so when we stand up, throw it on the billboards in London, God is dead, there's no God, the biblical literalist goes over and says, hey, the world's only 6,000 years old, even though God-given reason tells us otherwise on both accounts, okay? And then answers to the complexities of life are reduced to either like this material level or they're turned into like a faith-based system that's totally devoid of any kind of reason. That's not going to work, okay? The Catholic approach is not an either or, ever, okay? It's very much a both and system. So we say yes to scientific discovery, yes to Aquinas, yes to Aristotle, yes to the book of Genesis. That's far more yeses than we're given from either the scientism far side or creationism far side. And we don't have a ton of time to cover the church's complete view of evolution, but we'll talk about the philosophy problem later on, okay? So for this particular podcast, we're basically just going to outline the church's historical position, okay, on evolution through a series of documents and stuff given by popes over the last 66 years, okay? And I'm going to try to do it kind of quickly just so that we can unpack the actual language so that there's a sense of what the church is actually teaching, okay? It's really important to understand the church doesn't make an official pronouncement on matters of science. It's not really within her authority. Okay. The church promulgates teachings of faith as given through us through scripture and tradition, period. Okay. The church can't overstep the boundaries and make a bunch of judgments on matters of science, although there's like a ton of craters on the moon named after Jesuits. Okay. So lots of people have dedicated themselves to great astronomical research, scientific research, genealogy research, all of this stuff. But in terms of like Rome, doctrine, dogma, there's not going to be some official statement. So the only time the church formally responds to like a scientific thing is when theological or spiritual issues are heavily involved. And popes and theologians discuss the new discoveries, but the church has no official position on a scientific theory. Okay. And that leads us to the church's first discussion of evolution. So Humani Generis, the church formally speaks on evolution. In 1950, Pope Pius XII issued an encyclical, Humani Generis, which deals with various intellectual trends in regarding science, philosophy, and theology. Okay. Darwin's theory of evolution was nearly 100 years old at the time, and it clearly influenced all disciplines within the natural sciences, okay? The letter, the encyclical, demonstrated a position held by the church throughout those 100 years, but one that had not been formally recognized until its promulgation, okay? So evolution of the body and nature does not contradict Catholic doctrine so long as it is held that God is the first cause of the universe. Okay, so the teaching authority of the church does not forbid that in conformity with the present state of human sciences and sacred theology, research and discussions on the part of people experienced in both fields take place with regard to the doctrine of evolution. It does not forbid that. And as far as the inquiries basically into the origin of the human body are coming from pre-existent and living matter. So for the Catholic faith, it basically obliges us to hold that souls are immediately created by God, the infinity of God. Okay. Now, this has got to be done in such a way that the reasons for both opinions, that's basically that those are favorable and those unfavorable to evolution, by weighed and judged with necessary seriousness, an understanding of modern thought and measurement, and provide all are prepared to submit to the judgment of the church. Okay, that's the teaching. That's the language from the document, that the soul is infinite. But hey, science, have at it. Let's discover. Okay, I love that. So Humani Generis addresses two issues, major issues. First, there can never be evolution of the soul because it's created with God as its first cause, period. So since the soul is immaterial, it cannot evolve as things in the material universe evolve, period. Okay? This means the faculties of the soul, intellect and will, do not evolve as the body evolves. That's cool to know, okay? The church has a clear obligation to clarify this position for the mystical body and the world. So second, the church wants to make it clear that no one is required to submit to evolutionary theory, and that open and reasoned dialogue should take place between persons on the topic, period. All right. Each member within the church is permitted to agree or disagree with lots of different aspects of evolutionary theory, but the church also dismisses outright an overly literal interpretation of Genesis as a book of science. Catholics, that is good for you to know. Okay, so why is the church so open to the possibility of evolution? And this is a big deal. This is a big question. Why is the Catholic Church one of the few that's really open to this conversation? The church does not presume to limit the creative power, will, and scope of God. Theology 101. The church holds that God acts primarily through secondary causes, like curing infection through antibiotics. Okay, that's okay. That makes sense. This is why the cause for sainthood is so rigorous, and it's actually a scientific process. Okay, God rarely acts as the first cause in healing a person or through other direct interventions in the natural order. So if God is found to be the primary cause after rigorous scientific inquiry, then a miracle is declared. Okay, the church recognizes the natural order that God created, including the powers and potentialities that exist within nature. That is a crystal clear explanation of this idea of continual creation. All right. So the use of like intermediary or secondary causes, it does not indicate a God who is less intelligent and powerful than one who would make things directly, but one who is more intelligent and powerful. So getting non-intelligent beings to participate in the production of the world is more difficult than doing everything oneself. Okay? So you have to design instruments, the elements themselves, in such a way as to allow them to share in this task. So it's making things not only to be, but to be causes shows greater power. That's a line from Christopher Beglow, and he wrote this great book called Faith, Reason, and Science, Theology on the Cutting Edge, and it's really, really good, okay? St. John Paul II said in 1986, as he kind of returned to Humani Generis, although he expanded it in light of kind of all kinds of new scientific findings, he says it's become increasingly clear through the research of multiple disciplines, not just biology, that evolution is proving to be more than a hypothesis in numerous cases. So while many in the scientific field may be impatient with the church's very cautious attitude, scientists need to remember that the church lives according to the virtue of prudence. So, for example, the church took hundreds of years to formally clarify her Christology. Christology was developed over hundreds of years. Plus, the church is never going to make any formal declarations on the validity of evolution. This doesn't mean that the church is not involved in scientific study and discussions on a huge range of topics. But St. John Paul II says, there are no difficulties in explaining the origin of man in regard to the body by means of the theory of evolution. According to the hypothesis mentioned, it is possible that the human body, following the order impressed by the Creator on the energies of life, could have gradually been prepared in the form of antecedent living beings, i.e., living beings that existed prior to humanity. That's St. John Paul II, Humans Are Spiritual and Corporal Beings, from 1986. Okay? That's a big deal. In 1996, St. John Paul II addressed the Pontifical Academy of Sciences on the topic of evolution, saying that new scientific findings, quote, lead us towards recognition of evolution as more than a hypothesis. Now, that is powerful. But here's the thing. While this might be the case, it by no means leads us to conclude that evolution is the answer to everything. Okay, we got to be careful there. And this is the mistaken belief of far too many people. Pope Benedict said in 2007, word for word, he said, but the doctrine of evolution does not answer everything and does not answer the great philosophical question, where does everything come from? And how does everything take a path that ultimately leads to the person? It seems to me that it is very important that reason opens up even more, that it sees this information about evolution, but that it also sees that this information is not enough to explain all of reality. That was Pontiff Evolution Does Not Exclude a Creator in July 27, 2001. Okay, so evolution is a really valuable theory in explaining how God uses secondary causes within the universe. So science is a good that should be pursued, and God gives us reason so that we can come to know him through the beauty, wonder, intelligibility, and grandeur, right, of his creation. So the natural sciences, they don't tell us everything we need to know about the natural order of things. It just doesn't work that way. Science can't address matters related to the immaterial or spiritual realities of man and God. Science can never penetrate the ontological level of humankind. It just can't. This is why philosophy and theology are so essential. Okay, philosophy and theology help us to understand God, human beings, the universe, and eschatology at the deeper level of faith, guided by reason. That's a huge deal. Man, that's why I did my undergrad in theology and philosophy. I double majored in unemployment. Listen to me now, okay? It's a big deal. The church walks this kind of gorgeous middle road, okay? She always walks the middle road, which is why she's derided by both sides during most of these kind of pissing matches that we see. The church teaches that God is the first cause of the universe. God spoke creation into being through all kinds of acts of charity. God is to be itself, meaning I am, right? Men and women are material and immaterial, embodied spirits, Thomas Aquinas teaches us. So the body may be a product of God-driven evolution, but the soul doesn't evolve. The soul is created by God as its first cause. And it's really important for us to remember that faith and reason have to always be ordered by truth. That means no scientific finding can ever contradict the teachings of faith. Truth is truth. So when we understand this reality, we can live in a lot of freedom here, that rather than in fear or confusion of some conflict. It's also really important to look to the church's answers rather than just assuming they don't exist. So this type of mentality, it drives me crazy. It's kind of a form of like intellectual laziness, which really just kind of needs to be chucked out the window. Listen, as Catholics, we have an obligation to seek out answers to questions that arise. I always say this in youth ministry: ask the hard questions. Listen, seeking truth goes to the very heart of what it means to even be human, all right? That's who we are. The Catholic Church is where science, philosophy, and theology all converge as we continue this journey towards truth, who is the triune God. Take that into young adulthood. Take that to college with you. It is so beautiful when the greatest minds in science recognize the wonder and awe. I mean, just the genuine, majestic nature of what they're even doing in discovery. I love that. I love hearing the most famous astronomers say, how can you not believe in an eternal creator when we get to stare at his creation all day long and see its infinite majesty? Are you kidding me? How could you be a doctor who helps birth babies and not go, oh my gosh, life is precious? I mean, there's so much gorgeous synthesis between the sciences and the faith-filled. And I think it stands to reason that we need to be better proclaimers of this truth. Ask the hard question. If you're intellectually lazy in your faith, oh my gosh, just read a sample of history. The greatest minds came out of the philosophy and theology of the younger church. That is exactly what we're called to be. And I love that we can resolve those things in the pursuit of truth. Woo! That's a good one. Evolution, baby. Bring it on. Start sending me some more topics. I want to dig into these tough ones. Don't forget to visit renovopodcast.com for past episodes. Please subscribe to, review, and rate our podcast. We always appreciate the input. Bring topic suggestions, questions, and/or comments. They're always welcome at doug@renovopodcast.com. Learn more about me at dougtooke.com or on Twitter and Instagram at DTOOKE and the number 1. Friends, always remember to engage the tradition, a tradition which includes philosophy, theology, and science, and live the conversion. Until next time, God bless.